Welcome everyone to another Find a Cure webinar, this time on building your patient group data to drive research. And some of the context for this webinar is from our work on registries last year. We noticed that building data and capturing and collecting data is becoming something that more and more patient groups are involved with. And we wanted to show that there are other ways that you can collect data outside of a clinical setting, especially due to obviously COVID-19 at the moment means that we've had to adapt a lot of our practices. And so this webinar is just a way to explore some of those different approaches. So we're going to have Dan Lewi from the CATS Foundation talking to us about their approach, and also Femida and Ellen talking about a collaborative approach to capturing and collecting that data. Here are some faces to put the names to the faces, and they are also on your screen. So really happy again to be joined by a big room of people and a very collaborative approach again, just like our last webinar. So for anyone who is new here, Find a Cure is a rare disease charity, and our vision is a world in which all rare diseases have treatments made together with patients for patients. So we really value that collaborative approach to bring about treatment and cure. And what we like to do is empower patient groups through our empowerment program, and we also promote repurposing. And our ultimate goal is to build a rare disease community so we can accelerate treatment development. So today's webinar is going to follow this schedule. So after my introduction, Dan is going to take over and talk about his experience with the CATS Foundation and data collection. And then we're going to be joined by Ellen Haf Davies and Femida Gwadry-Sridha to talk about patient groups, data and real world evidence and what you should consider. And then we'll have the all important Q&A session at the end. Some of the aims of today and things that you should hopefully get out of it at the end are understanding the value of collecting data as a patient group, examples of how data collection can drive change in your rare disease, the types of data you can collect and how it can be collected, real-world evidence and its impact on clinical research, and some of the challenges associated with data collection, and what collaborative approaches to patient group data collection, an example of a platform that's been developed to support patient groups to do this. So now I'm going to hand over to Dan, and he's going to start us up on his part of the webinar.
Okay, everyone. So hopefully you can see the slides in front of me. So I'm going to talk you through how the CATS Foundation went about its kind of data collection, and where we saw the importance of kind of taking this approach to drive forward the research and the treatment options for our disease, which is TAY-SACHS and SANDHOFF. So just to give you a very kind of quick overview, I think it's important to understand kind of who we are as an organisation. So we were founded in 2011 to provide support for people affected by TAY-SACHS and SANDHOFF disease. Those are two rare genetic disorders that had no dedicated support or organisation here in the UK or Europe. There are a few organisations in the US, but there's nothing really providing us any support here. And they're unfortunately terminal diseases in the infantile form, and there was a real need to have someone stand up and kind of put the disease on the map in terms of for research and for future treatments. In terms of data collection, again, it's quite important to understand what we're about. So we're a small community with an incidence rate of about 1 in 320,000 people diagnosed each year in the UK. That's between 3 to 6 people a year. It's a terminal illness where people lose ability to function independently and end up requiring 24-hour care. An average life expectancy around about 5 years of age. So it's a very cruel disease when it affects children and adults as well. So like many of you on the calls who are patient groups, we all have a beginning of our story, and the beginning of our story is normally about one person. In our case, it's this young lady here. This is my eldest daughter, Amelie, and she was diagnosed with TAY-SACHS at 15 months of age in 2011. As I said before, she's the reason why the organisation was started, because there was no support, there was no information, there was no understanding of the research, and there was no idea what we could do for the future for her. We were just going to watch her slip away through this disease. And if we were going to do that, were we just going to sit there and watch that, or we're going to try and do something and change the future for other children affected by the disease? And so that's what happened. We decided to set up a patient group here in the UK to look at the research and to raise our profile, because we quickly realised that although it's rare, there must be other people. And like many of you who are impacted by a rare disease, we were told the usual: go home, spend time with your child, she's going to pass away, and you're going to meet another family affected by this disease. And I didn't believe in that. My wife didn't believe in that. We really thought we needed to work out a way to bring people together to work with researchers and pharma companies to drive forward research. And to do that, we quickly set ourselves a goal at the charity, and the idea being that we wanted to save children from this disease. We wanted them to have the opportunity to have a future, because it was really bleak. To be honest, walking out of a diagnosis where you're told your child's going to die is the worst thing that any parent has to face. And so we wanted to change that for other people in the future. So for us, it was really important that we set foundations as an organisation. We realised that raising awareness is really important. To raise awareness, you get more patient numbers, and we get more patient numbers, you can get more data. We also quickly realised that setting up charities, not just here in the UK, in Europe, was vital. And our kind of approach here was that we wanted to get as many people within some sort of patient registry as quickly as possible, but we couldn't be responsible for that as one overarching organisation that supported everyone in Europe. So we took the stance that we should empower other parents who could set up charities in their home country, because they would understand the rules and regulations and have language barriers, and they could do a similar thing that we've done here in the UK, which was, for us, has worked out very well. And we're able to develop an actual consortium, and this is where we bring together all the European charities together to look for treatments and look for research, because it's much better as a group to stick together than to be funding projects independently. And actually we've been able to drive forward a lot of research projects this way. And I think this approach, by empowering other parents from other countries to lead their charity rather than having that one organisation, has been really critical to our success. So I want to take you all the way back to 2011. So this is when Emily was diagnosed, and we did the usual, you search for any miracle cure out there, and this is the only thing we found. There was one gene therapy program being looked at here in the UK, and there was nothing else. There was no drug repurposing, there was no drug studies, there was nothing. So we realised that, you know, there needed to be a change. And I remember talking to researchers and talking to pharma companies saying that we need to do something about Tay-SACHS and SANDHOFF disease. What can we do? How can we get you guys interested to look at this disease to help us find a way where we could provide a treatment? And they said to me, the numbers speak for themselves. So I remember being told that many times, there aren't enough numbers. And as the parent, or sometimes the patient, when you're that 1 in a million, or in our case, that 1 in 320,000, that really hurts, because it doesn't matter if there's 1 in 10 million. If you're the person who's affected by a disease, or you're watching your child die, that's the only number you need to know. You shouldn't have to justify why you need to look at a treatment. But unfortunately, to get the pharma involved, to get researchers involved, we had to show the numbers. So the numbers had to speak for themselves. So we had to drive things forward by finding patients and getting all of their data together that we could then present and say, look, there isn't just one person in the UK or 2 people. There's 200, 300 people across Europe who could benefit from any treatment that you're looking at. So to take you back again to 2011, this is where we were. There was one treatment option potentially, but it was quite a way off. And my wife and I sat down and said, look, we need to set a goal for the organisation. Wouldn't it be amazing in 20 years' time that we would have multiple treatments for Tay-SACHS and SANDHOFF disease? No, we could have this main goal that we want to say in 20 years' time, we could potentially be curing children from dying from Tay-SACHS and SANDHOFF. And at Aparito, we actually use something called objective key results. To me, this is really important. An OKR is essentially setting yourself a very clearly defined goal that you can achieve. And so for us, this was our key goal. We wanted to get these treatments in 20 years' time. And yes, it's ambitious, but I think we can get there. And I always think back to my eldest brother. So my eldest brother was diagnosed with diabetes when he was 5 years old. My mother was told, take your son home. He's never going to leave home. He's probably going to lose his legs because of complications of diabetes. He's never going to get married. He's never going to have children. So prepare yourself. It's going to be a rough ride for the next few years as your son, suffers from diabetes. The thing is, 20 years later, my brother is a successful teacher. He's married. He has 4 children. And thankfully, he doesn't live at home anymore. But it showed that in 20 years, he went from having my mum have to draw up his insulin into the traditional syringes, go to the bathroom to give him his injections in his leg or in his bum or his stomach. Now we can do it discreetly, even at the dinner table. No one will know he's actually using his insulin. So if that can happen in 20 years, imagine what we can do if we get enough people interested in our disease. Technology has moved on so far, especially on the research side with gene therapy and with drug repurposing, that I really firmly believe that this is a goal that we can achieve. So the first thing we did to kind of achieve that goal was we identified that there were key stakeholders here, but they're all kind of working independently. The charities were doing their own thing, the patients were doing their own thing, research was happening, wasn't really involving patients that often, and pharma were kind of circulating, but not really being interested in the disease. We realized very quickly we had to bring them together. And to bring them together, what was the one thing that they'll all be interested in? And in this case, it's data on the disease, understanding the impact it has on an individual, and how actually can move things forward and get treatments out there. And for us, it's the really key point, as teamwork makes the dream work. You have to collaborate. So we had to work with our patients. We had to work with our other patient groups. We had to work with pharma and researchers to get them all on the same page, that if we all club together and collaborate, we can drive forward research much quicker than it's happened before. And we can get these treatments happening and going to save children's lives. To us, it's really, really important. It's a collaborative approach. And this is, to me, one of the most important things. I speak to many patient groups over the years, and through Aparito, more and more patient groups I've spoken to have talked about having patient registries, developing endpoints and things like that. But to me, the patient group needs to really understand, what do they want to achieve? Yeah. What do they want to collect? Why do they want to collect it? And how do they want to collect it? These are really, really important decisions, because if you don't really understand why, you just think you should have a registry, it will fail, because you need to get buy-in from everyone involved. You need to get buy-in from your doctors, from researchers, and from your patients and parents and carers to give you that data. So for us, we decided very clearly we wanted to have a natural history of the disease. There was lots of speculation that the disease followed this linear path where seizures happen at a certain point, they required assisted feeding, but no one fully understood what the tradition, what a kind of standard line of the disease was. We wanted to understand that in a lot more detail. We wanted to connect families, and I think this is often overlooked when you're collecting data for patient registries. People tend to only look at the pharma and the researcher side. Actually, it's vital to bring families together, because then that gives them the opportunity to come together, spend time together, and meet other people affected by the rare disease. And the byproduct of that is that pharma, that researchers are interested, because they can see that there are patient numbers, because no company will look at the disease to drive it forward for a treatment without actually having any patient numbers. And these are one of the main things that the any sort of registry or data collection can do. And then the other really important thing is looking at who your data can help. So of course, researchers, doctors, pharma are really, really important in this conversation. But to me, sometimes I find that these guys are overlooked, and these are the patients. These are the people who are giving their data, or their parents are giving the data. And these are the ones you want to impact. And I think it's just the most important thing that we always remember, that we're doing this for these people. And in our case, for the CATS Foundation, these 4 children have sadly passed away from the disease. So the data that they've provided will, and we hope, impact and influence research going forward, and impact other families who are affected by TAY-SACHS and SANDHOFF. So nothing's given in vain, that we know that we can and we will make a difference to those other people affected by the diseases in the future. And one of the other big decisions when you start any sort of patient registry is, how much data do you want to keep? Do you want to keep a lot, or do you want to keep a little? And now for us, as a rare disease, we made the decision that we wanted to keep a lot of information, because we had small patient numbers. We knew that we could stay on top of contacting people when they needed to update their data. So we keep all sorts of things in relating to the disease and demographics and the personal data, versus just a little bit of information where maybe you just keep a gene type and someone's gender. Because for us, the impact that we could have with a lot more information that we store within our patient registry means that we can unlock more information about the disease. Because sadly, for us, not very much was known about TAY-SACHS or SANDHOFF, and thankfully that's now moved forward where a lot more is known. So the information that we collect for the CATS Foundation is here. So we collect everything about the diagnosis. So for this is diagnosis date, where that person was diagnosed, the gene mutations they have, and this is throwing up really interesting information about mutations from seen in different parts of the world actually appearing in Europe rather than South America, for example, and migration. We're seeing pockets and communities of people who have split apart, and our children are being diagnosed with TAY-SACHS in communities where it's rarely been seen. Then we keep the family history, which is really important, understanding who are carriers of the disease. We keep the symptoms, and we keep a lot of information here, because to us it's really important, as I said before, to understand the impact of disease on an individual. You know, when these symptoms happen. So we record when seizures start and that date, because it's really important to really understand at the age. So when people have seizures, when they have assisted feeding. And then we also keep the demographics where people are located throughout Europe. So we've got some great data there. And also obviously we keep consent, because that's vital for any sort of data collection. That's all stored within our system. And this is a quote, and this is like a Jim quote, but to me it's really, really like vital for any sort of data collection. Someone needs to do the hard work. There is no, unfortunately, there's no miracle person out there who will just get the data to appear. Someone needs to go out, needs to collect it, needs to make it possible for patients to provide their information into the registry or any data collection project. And they have to do, someone has to do that heavy lifting. And for us, it took us a lot of work. So it took us 5 years to get anywhere near the point where we had enough information on our patient population to make a difference, to go to companies, to get papers written about that, the natural history. So you have to be prepared that it's not just a project that you set up and the data suddenly appears. You have to go out and proactively go and collect it. But it's one of the most rewarding things that can happen when you suddenly have researchers contacting you for information about the disease, and you can give it. You can provide, you know, the disease progression. You can say the genetic mutations I've never seen before. And it's fascinating then to see them get interested in the disease and potentially look at treatment options for pharma companies. So for me, I'm a big advocate of patient-reported data. It's the same as Aparito. We think it's a great way to actually get true information because it's accurate. Having been a parent of a child affected by a rare disease, if someone said to me, when did your child have her first seizure? I can tell you it was in November 2011. I was having coffee with my dad in a coffee shop in London. Now I remember it distinctly happening. And this is the thing. Parents, carers and patients themselves are invested in their health. They want to make a difference. And they have this accurate information they can give to you to input into some sort of data project that can influence the research on the disease. And I think that going down this route with patient-reported data is so important nowadays, because you're not restricting it into national health services or having it locked away. You're having it available within your system, which can make a difference. And I think this is the quote that everyone knows, is straight from the horse's mouth, and it really is. You're getting that information directly from the people impacted by the condition, and it can really make a difference. And in terms of data collection, to me, this is the sad thing. It really is a numbers game. You know, back in 2011, there were a few kind of natural history studies, kind of literature reviews, but no one had a cohort of patients. There were maybe 3 people here in the UK. We now have over 120 plus patients in our patient registry who were diagnosed after 2015 or were alive at 2015 when the diagnosis of TAY-SACHS or SANDHOFF. And this is a huge number of patients. I remember speaking to a company and they said, you know, if you had 20 data on 25 patients, that's already a lot. So to be at 120 in 5 years, it's taken us a long time, but now we can go to companies and we can go to researchers and get them interested in our disease. And one of the things that Ellen and Femida will talk about, this partnership that Pulse and Aparito have, is that they're going to be able to help other patient groups cut down that journey. So what's taken us 5 years potentially can help other patient groups have this journey that maybe takes 1 year. You know, and that can help drive forward research so much quicker. And there won't be as much hard work on the patient group, because all of this was off our own back. We had to contact the company who could develop our patient registry. We had to go out proactively and get patients and get translations done and get the data into our system. But having a digital partner can really make a difference in speeding that journey up, which I think is going to be really, really exciting. And so for us, the registry, we found new things. And as I said before, we have this lineal kind of progression of the disease. It's really exciting. It's been talked about in literature for years, but no one's actually been able to produce a chart. And now we have that. And this is something we can then look at in any treatment. We can move the endpoints. So we're looking at maintaining feeding, for example, or the seizure activity. We can look at the geographic location of people, and it's really exciting what you can discover in a patient registry or data collection project. And I'm going to just want to take you back to 2011. So when I said that this was the state of play for research, and it was. And remember, I said we have this goal to have treatments available in 20 years or so. This is what we've achieved in the last 9-10 years. So by 2020, we've got multiple projects going on. We've got actually 3 different gene therapy programs that are being looked at with different approaches. We've got a couple of drug repurposing studies. We've got new drugs coming to the market, substrate reduction therapy, which is really, really exciting. This isn't down by luck. This is down by hard work of the patients community, hard work of the patient groups, not just us, but other patient groups in Europe and the US, to put our disease on the map. And the only way we've been able to do that is with the patient data and patient numbers. And I look at this and I just think back in 2011, when Emily was diagnosed, walking out with no diagnosis packs or anything, just it was a photocopy of a printout of what TAY-SACHS was. Seeing where we are now, not just that people walk out of the hospital with diagnosis, they get a diagnosis pack and immediate contact to a charity that supports them, but seeing the development in research is the most exciting thing, because if we've done this in 9 or 10 years, I really believe that our goal of 20 years' time is attainable, and we can potentially have those treatments in place to save children affected by the disease. I just want to quickly touch on the impact of what your data can have. So this little boy, the little baby boy there, is Brandon, and he's his brother Thomas. So Thomas sadly passed away from TAY-SACHS 20 years ago. His family never met anyone else affected by TAY-SACHS or SANDHOFF disease. And Brandon, bless him, was a small baby when his brother died. And in fact, last year, Brandon contacted us and wanted to know more about the disease. He wanted to know more about how it impacted his brother, how it impacts other children. This is now Brandon as an adult. He's holding a little boy called Stanley, who sadly passed away as well. But Stanley went to the same hospice as Thomas, and that's how we're able to connect them. And we're able to connect them via the simple fact that we had a community, and our community is based on the data we collect. The data we collect all feeds into this registry project that we have, this data collection project that is impacting and make a difference to our community. And I just look at this photo, and to me, it just sums up what our goal is. We're going to make a difference. And Brandon says his parents can't believe how much support families now get. They literally had nothing. And that's a testament to our community, that people can now come together and share stories, share experiences, and help them through the journey that they're going to be going through. And just to touch back on, this is our dream, to have this kind of multiple treatments in 10 years' time. I really believe, as you've seen in the presentation, we've moved things forward very quickly. We could have been quicker. We could, if we had a technology partner, for example, on the registry side, who could have helped us. Yes, we could have been in this journey a few years ahead. But the exciting thing is, I really believe we're going to get there, and we are giving people hope. We're giving the light at the end of the tunnel. At the end of the day, that's all you really need as a family or a person affected by a rare disease. You need to know that it's not just, that's it, game over. No, there are treatment options coming to market. We potentially can help you in the future. And I think that's the really exciting thing that you can do with data collection and with patient registries. You can really help them see that nothing is standing still and everyone is working towards this common goal of finding a treatment. So those are my contact details if anyone wants to get in touch or has any questions about the project of what we did.
Dan, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Really brilliant illustration, I think, of what a simple idea and a real focus on collecting data can achieve in the patient group. I just wanted to drop in with a couple of questions. We've got a couple of minutes. Lots of patients we talk to are trying to do this kind of thing and get registry set up and started, but there's always that initial hurdle of how do you go around sourcing that bit of funding or that making that first step. I wonder if you could just share some of your thoughts or experience in how you went about that at CATS.
So with the funding, we were fortunate to get a couple of small grants from actual families who had children affected by the disease. And so we also funded most of it directly through the charity, because we saw the importance of the importance of having some sort of registry that could impact the disease. And then finding a partner, in our case, Open App, were able to provide the technology at a cost we could afford. We could never have built something like this, any sort of registry, but being able to partner with someone who wanted to make a difference in a rare disease space was important for us.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I know when we chatted earlier, you mentioned that you'd moved to a place where you're looking to commercialize in some way. I just wondered if you could maybe comment a little bit on that and the strategy behind it, and the kind of challenges you might have encountered down the way.
The challenge is more the looking at the bigger picture. We're all in a really difficult space in terms of funding as patient groups, and the economic climate is even now with COVID, it's got even worse. We're all fighting for money essentially to keep ourselves going. And you look at the assets we have as patient groups. Our data is our asset. You look at the pharma companies; they want to take a drug to market, and they will charge X amount. If they need data, we can provide them data at a cost, because then the money we get goes directly back into our patient community to help them. There's a moral question of, should you be charging for the data? Well, if a company's going to be making money on the back of putting a treatment to market, then the patient group should also benefit from that. And as I said, we have this data that's not behind any firewalls. It's not kept restricted by the NHS or by other pharma companies. It's kept by the patient organisation, and we are governed by a governing document that says we have to benefit our community. So it's not like anyone's going to be making any money off the back of it. It's all about making sure that anything we get can be reinvested back into our core services, which is providing support to our children and our adults affected by TAY-SACHS and SANDHOFF disease.
Fantastic, Dan. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
So our next presentation will be from Haf Davies, who is the founder of Aparito, and Femida Gwadry-Sridha, who's the founder of Pulse Infoframe, and they're going to be talking through kind of their approaches to capturing and collecting that data in a collaborative way, and what you can consider as a patient group when you're approaching these sometimes complicated topics of data and data collection. So over to them.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And Dan, thank you very much for the great presentation that you gave, because I think it really kind of illustrates some of the challenges that parents and rare disease advocacy groups have. So I want us to sort of think about the journey that you or your loved one has been on. And I think we would all agree that each experience is different with no straight path. Given the variability in each person's experience, it's hardly surprising that when considering how best to capture relevant data and information, none of us know up front what we will need and how we plan to use it. And that's why we have collectively considered a solution that can be adapted to the needs and your needs as they evolve over time. No one wants to hit a wall. We want to be able to expand our needs, and we don't always know, as I said up front, what we're looking for. So you need a solution that's going to allow you to grow, even if you don't know where the end point is. To be successful, we also need to know that each path can be confusing, and it can be different because every patient is different. And collectively, Pulse and Aparito are really here to help navigate that path. And really what we did was we created a picture that really illustrates what it's really like. You don't always need to start out with a large registry. You have to think about what you need at a specific point in time, and then hopefully work with a team that can help you navigate your needs as things progress. Next slide. A global footprint is very important for rare disease research. I've been looking at some of the questions coming in through the chat. How do you establish, the incidence or the prevalence? And that's why understanding where people are globally is extremely important. The community is not in a single country or city, and people are dispersed, each wanting to share their story. And that's why patients are core to our mission. At Pulse, we were founded in 2011, and collectively as a company have over 100 years of both technology and clinical experience through our team. This experience has really helped inform our approach to how we undertake to build registries and to work with each of our stakeholders, which include patients, advocacy groups, pharma, biotech, and key opinion leaders. As a company, we have core expertise in building technology, but also in applying the science, because it's not really about technology on its own. It's about understanding the needs of each. Ellen?
Hi, yes. So thank you again for the great introduction, Dan and Femida. So from our side at Aparito, we also really focus on the sort of, as you see on the left-hand side of our illustration here, on the design and strategize piece. And that very much comes from the position that we come from a very clinical and regulatory and patient advocacy background. So we work with every partner or stakeholder, be it patient advocacy group, key opinion leaders, or sponsor and pharmaceutical companies, to understand what the data requirement needs are, and then how technology and innovation can lead to that. So we don't, when we go to implementing the technology or using the innovation, that we don't hit unexpected roadblocks or barriers because we haven't sort of thought through all the clinical, patient and regulatory aspects to be considered with that. And that's where we've applied our approach for all the studies that we've deployed over the last 5-6 years now. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over this one for Femida to talk about where data and what is data. What do we mean by data?
Okay, sorry, I thought this one was yours, but that's okay.
Sorry, I think the numbers have changed. I mean, sorry. Then I think, sorry. From our point of view, data can be all-encompassing, and sort of understanding where and what data is something that we really need to sort of help understand the value of it and where it comes from. So traditionally, we would have been focused very much on the data captured within the hospital wall or from the clinical diagnosis sort of point of view. So now, with the advent of digital devices and understanding the voice of the patient and the importance of that, we see that there are multiple layers of data that can contribute to giving a far wider picture of what's important. And so one of the key pieces will be to collate all the data that gives a full picture on the personal experience, the clinical understanding, and then from a natural history towards contributing ultimately to the drug development pathway, from designing the clinical trial, regulatory approval of it, and then of course reimbursement, which is really important. So it's very multifaceted.
Okay, great. So thank you, Ellen, for explaining you know, the whole concept of where data comes from. So here, looking at data and how data becomes evidence is really what I want to be able to talk about. If we think about data and how it becomes evidence, it needs to be well structured, it needs to be identified in advance and with a purpose. If you think about the highest level of evidence, generally clinical trials provide the highest level of evidence. So from an evidence-based perspective or evidence-based medicine perspective, a trial is really where you're randomizing people generally to either get treatment or no treatment, or comparing two treatments. In the rare disease community, this is extremely difficult to do because, first of all, there aren't large numbers of patients. And most importantly, there are lots of data that are collected, as Dan mentioned, that have a tremendous amount of value that can still be utilized. And so really what we're trying to do is determine the best way to really think about data, capture it in a way that can be utilized, and then ultimately be applied to drug delivery. Now, one of the key tenets of getting data is also getting patient information. So as we think about the registries, for example, that we're collectively building with the wearables, really important to think about, first of all, what are the contact details of people? Where do they live? Where do they come from? What are their demographics? And then what is their history with respect to their genetics? And then what we do is we think about the data that are going to be important to serve the purpose to get us to evidence. Not all data can become evidence. And I think sometimes there's a misnomer that the more we collect, the more information we collect, the better off we are. And that's not always true. So essentially what we're looking at here is identifying the types of data, structuring the data so that we can get the highest level of evidence, and ultimately what we're able to do then is to put together registries that provide evidence through the types of data that patients are able to provide and the data that we collect from the multiple sources that Ellen has already identified. Next slide. Somewhat reiterating what Ellen mentioned in slide 4, data can take various forms. So if you think about data and where you go and all the people you touch and the institutions you go to, data can come from electronic health records and other data sources. There's genomic data, lab data, and these data all provide a piece of the puzzle that helps us better understand each patient. But what really is a key part of this puzzle is the patient's own preferences, their own perception of the impact of their condition on themselves, their caregivers, and their family members. And by defining the data and what we call endpoints that are important for patients, we can get one step closer to drug development. So reusing some of the words that Dan used, we want the data that comes from the horse's mouth, because your perception as a patient or a patient's perception is very important. It doesn't reflect anybody else's perception, but becomes a critical part in developing the types of endpoints that are important and preferences that are important from a patient perspective. Data that are all in these systems that I described, like electronic health records, et cetera, are all siloed. In a registry, what we do is we break down those silos, because data that are siloed have less value. They need to come into a single environment where they can be utilized. The wearable data, the clinical data, the patient-reported outcome data. Dan also alluded to this, providing data into registries, providing data so that drugs can be developed is all terrific. But patients and carers really need to feel like they're contributing to the community. How does that happen? It happens in a way where essentially you want to know and get feedback of how the data are being used. And so the platform that we have integrating with Aparito provides a real sense of engaging with the community in a way, not just taking information, but providing information back. So in other words, not just knowing whether a paper was published in a journal, but understanding what's being used with and done with the data and how you could contribute in a more meaningful way. The data have to be disease specific. So there are lots of commonalities in rare diseases, but again, disease specific data are incredibly important and relevant. Codifying and identifying those data are equally important. So in other words, not just collecting the data, but thinking about a particular condition and codifying and structuring those data in a way that become usable. So leveraging what's known commonly, but also leveraging and understanding each disease on its own is really, a focus of what we do, and applying that on a single platform that can ultimately be utilized not just for that disease, but potentially for other diseases in the future. And obviously, getting feedback from patients in the study design, or even providing data so that patients can actually lead their own research, is a critical part of our joint mission in making everything we do patient-centric. Next slide to Ellen.
Thank you. So I think it can seem a little bit overwhelming. Where exactly do we start collecting data? And as Femida alluded to, there is a lot of value to be had in structuring the data carefully so that when it comes to aggregating it, to putting it all together, that we can utilize it effectively moving forward. So as a patient community, it can seem a little bit challenging to think, how can we go through all the regulatory burdens or the sort of compliance aspects of having access to clinical data via your doctors, your clinicians, or accessing electronic health records. But there are actually multiple single steps that we can start with the patients and the families themselves that will be instrumental in building the voice. And while we do strongly advocate that we collect this data from patients and families in a sort of unified, standardized or structured way, there are many things that we can also do that conveys the voice of the patients and the views of the families in a way that is more than just conveying numbers. So if we move on to the next slide. So the first thing is to sort of plan, and this is something that's sometimes worth pausing a little bit to think about, where do we want to go with this data? So the first part might be that we literally just start collecting the names and contact details of all the patients or the families that we're aware of. But then to sort of think, how can we build this and prepare it for a long journey? This is not to say that we don't often go back and relook at the plan and expand it, but it means that we have a certain road that we're traveling, a target, so that when we're collecting it all together, it will become easier to analyze. And I think Dan alluded to very well in his presentation that this is a bit of heavy lifting. I'm not a gardener myself, but it really does take quite a bit of work to sort of put this in motion and to nurture it. And I would also add that one of the key things in this helping data grow is to nurture the community that you are involved in. It's really important that the data is not siloed, so that the data is all together, but also that the communities are not siloed, so that when the patient voice builds and becomes stronger and stronger, it then becomes easier to integrate it with the clinical data, the electronic health records, and then the utilization and the meaning of this data becomes really powerful for informing clinical trials, for informing regulators, reimbursement decisions, and sometimes even policymakers. So taking a little bit of time at the beginning to plan the journey ahead, knowing that there will be a few U-turns and sort of rerouting required, but that's incredibly important. How is data collected?
Okay, great. Thank you, Ellen. So think about all the devices we have or have access to. Think about the wearables, the Bluetooth scales, etc. Also, when we think about all of the points of intersection that we have within our home, as well as the different interactions with the clinicians, healthcare providers, etc. that we have, there's so many things that we touch, so many wearables, so many devices. The data that are collected by them and stored in their own technology systems, as we've already noted. But for ease of use, what we're doing now is we're able to collect data real time, which is important, as not everybody remembers what they did 2 days ago or 7 days ago or even 30 days ago. And I remember the days when we used to send surveys to patients and they would be asked to think about what they did 30 days ago. I mean, the limit of human discrimination is 7 days at best. And so the beauty of being able to collect data real time is that we're able to get a mark on how people are doing at a particular place in time. That actually makes it much more helpful when we're looking even at analyzing the data and understanding trends. The ability to collect accurate data is extremely important, and so real-time access and using digital devices, as Ellen has noted, again, in the patient's home, provides a level of accuracy which will help better inform the drug development as well as understanding side effects from treatments and the impact directly on patients. It's also much easier for patients to provide their feedback on an ongoing basis. And finally, it reduces the burden of remembering when you have to schedule a call. So the integration of the Pulse and Aparito system provides specifically that venue, one where data are collected near real time and help describe what the patients are experiencing at that particular point in time, which is really important. And I think this has become even more relevant as we look at COVID and the impact of COVID in terms of access to treatment, access to healthcare facilities, etc. The ability to be able to engage in the home, to be able to utilize the data, as Ellen said, for clinical trials, as well as to be able to accurately collect patient-reported outcome measures is really, I think, a big leap forward in being able to support patients. Next slide, please.
And I think when we look at then unlocking this data, that's where, in the way I like to see it, that's where the magic happen, and we can unlock so many of the mysteries that are currently unknown about so many rare diseases. There is one founder of a rare disease patient group that was invited to go to the FDA, and the regulator said to her, "Don't bring me tears, bring me data." And I think that was a critical sort of statement to show how data can actually have long-lasting impact. So when we bring all this data together and analyze it in a collective way, it can build knowledge, it can secure funding. Dan touched on this. Through good data governance and data sharing, data can actually offer some sustainability for patient advocacy groups, but also it can bring support for the community at large. I think historically, we think of some assets, say like oil, as a very precious commodity, and then once it's used, it's gone and the value of it's disappeared. But the key thing with data is the more that we use it and the more that we share it carefully and within the governance of the rules available, the more value that that data brings. And so the value and the insights can, tell us so much more about the disease, but also importantly, influence the design of a clinical trial, influence the decisions of a regulator, influence the decision of a reimbursement, and also policy. And this collective data source is the strongest voice that a patient advocacy group can have.
Okay, so why is there a quest? I mean, a quest is a discovery. So first, we need to consider the data quality issues and some of the data quality considerations that were noted. The importance of properly specifying the condition or problem, identifying what is important versus what is not, and then looking for all of the relevant sources of data. The most common sources of data are on the left, but where we're moving today towards with respect to evidence are shown on the right, with patient-generated data, wearables, video, voice, etc. Each of these sources of data provide another glimpse into the natural history of the patient, as well as their journey, and also for integration from many sources of data so that a more complete picture can be formed, which in turn can help better inform drug development. By having multiple sources of data, we can then fill in the blanks where sometimes not all data are available. So think about a country where they're not able to bring in all of these data sources. And I think that's a really important consideration when you're looking at diseases and you're looking at people who are globally dispersed. And what we found is that sometimes you're able to get data from some countries and not from others. But as you continue to fulfill on trying to get the most high quality data from multiple sources, we're able to then use statistical techniques to fill in the blanks, potentially in countries where they're not able to do certain tests or they're not able to acquire certain data. And so by being able to have a global platform, which is really what Pulse is focused on from the very beginning, a platform that can engage and bring in people from all over the world and integrate the data with some of the Aparito generated data, you have a very fulsome picture. And so that's why it's a quest, because together we're going to focus on high quality data, input from a wide range of patients, people from different countries. As Dan mentioned, there are people who may not speak English, may not be their first language. So being able to adapt, being able to bring in data from different countries, and then continuing to engage people, because a patient journey and natural history is not a static point in time, it's an evolution. And so being able to collect data prospectively and longitudinally while not losing sight of the retrospective data that's been collected is equally important. And integration of data is not a simple task. Our platform is able to bring in data from multiple sources, harmonize it, and curate it. And so that is an important consideration from a regulatory perspective, being able to bring in data and map it to a global data standard that will be accessible and approved by the regulatory agencies. Next slide.
So I think, we've all touched upon it, and I think I've seen a couple of the questions come through. highlighting that on the one hand, we need to operate globally, or certainly across many countries, to get the patient numbers, but working across many different countries and many different languages brings specific challenge for governance, compliance, approvals. And that's where we really benefit from working together. To try and do all of this yourself, obviously it can seem very, very overwhelming. And even for us at Aparito, it was one of the key decisions why we wanted to form the partnership with Pulse Informa, because we strongly believe that collaboration and working together and sharing skills, sharing knowledge, and bringing people together is the best way to moving the agenda forward. And for us at Aparito, and speaking on behalf of Pulse, we see ourselves as fitting into a jigsaw pieces along all the other key important players, starting with the patient groups, and then obviously bringing in the other partners as well. So Femida, I think from your point of view, working globally and with partnership as well, if that's something you echo.
Yeah, absolutely. So I very much echo everything that Ellen said. And I think the key point is really that the cornerstone of success is really collaboration, not just between Pulse and Aparito, which is really important for what we're doing now, but with the key stakeholders, as Ellen has noted, in the ecosystem. I think by aligning each of our goals, we are able to collectively and definitively deliver on the needs of each group, and while keeping our eye on what the patient requires for success. And that's really, I think, the way that we approach the world, is having a definitive answer at the end, so that we're not constantly grappling, and bringing in data in a way that helps people work together and play together. Next slide, please. So any system has to think the way a clinician would. So if you think about each rare disease or each cancer or any disease, the whole workflow is really important. I think that we've already touched on collaboration, but the way that we've built our platform is very much to be aligned with the way a clinician would interact with the system, or the way a patient would interact. We focus a lot on clinical registries. That's our area of expertise. And so to do that, we want to make a system easy to use. And so I raise this because not everybody thinks about the mundane and the boring, which is essentially workflow, and what is the interaction of the system and how do people work with it. So compared to what we'll call static electronic data capture forms, where they're just set up in a certain way, what we do is we collectively think through each disease, really think at how does a physician or clinician approach this disease? How do they make a differential diagnosis? What are the types of questions that they ask and when they ask them? And we've configured our platform in a way that allows people to interact with the system in a way that makes sense to them. So essentially, we put a lot of effort into providing data as people, as patients, and we need to make sure that these data are usable and valuable and ultimately approved by regulatory agencies. Ellen, your thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, I fully support. I think from our point of view, as we generate new data sources, so from an Aparito point of view, we are, developing new data, new insights, and new data sources through the patient-facing technology, that we have to make sure that we also fit to the regulatory guidance, and also make sure that it's interoperable and communicates with the data sources that Pulse have. So if we go to the next slide. So I think for me, my background is very much in clinical trials, and this is where I see an exciting part of the field evolving, particularly now with COVID, where real data is important and real world evidence is important, but particularly if it allows to a better patient experience of clinical trials and an accelerated access of drugs to patients with high unmet need. So on the left, you'll see historically, my first clinical trial was sort of 20 years ago now. And at that time, patients with a rare disease traveled, across many different countries to travel to a specialist site or center. And it was extremely challenging for the patients to comply with all the hospital-based tests, spend time away from family, time away from work, supporting their family member to take part in a clinical trial. Technology has evolved, and clinical trials have not necessarily to date caught up with that. And what we're aspiring to support is this new model on the right, where we support a decentralized or virtual clinical trial, where that in essence means that we take the clinical trial to the patient in their home to reduce the amount of burden on them. And that's being made possible with these sort of connected devices and technology that we're now developing and co-creating. At the moment, there is still, some drugs or some mechanism of actions that definitely need some visits to the hospital, and that would be this hybrid model. And for the time being, I think the majority of regulated clinical trials are still likely to be in this hybrid model. But what we're aspiring to see is get validated digital endpoints captured at home and reducing that patient burden for sharing their data. So next slide, please.
So collectively, I think hopefully you get the view that Aparito and Pulse have an end-to-end solution, and why that's important. I mean, think about you buying a car, and you buy a car and there are a lot of missing pieces, and you have to keep going back to either get a radio or something or whatever it is. And a registry really is no different. An end-to-end solution means that you follow the patient journey from the home to the bedside and beyond. And that's really important, from the early inception right to the clinical trials, and then ultimately providing supporting data for pricing reimbursement, because it doesn't stop once a drug is approved. It's our ability to collectively provide real world data that are being used right now in a number of our registries to support the pricing reimbursement. And so why standards are important, and why science matters, and why an integration of expertise and systems is important, is really to deliver an end-to-end solution. Ellen, over to you.
Yeah, and I think that's where, from our point, I think I sort of already illustrated a little bit, but making sure that the patient's acceptability, the patient usability, and the patient co-creation in the way that this data is conveyed, so that the data has meaning and the data is interpreted in a way that conveys what's important. We can then collectively make sure that it's conveyed for policy and regulators and reimbursements in a way that conveys the voice of the patient.
And finally, just a huge thank you from me and from the rest of the Find the Cure team to Ellen, Femida and Dan. I think that was a really informative and brilliant webinar.